Hello again, everyone, and welcome to our webinar for this afternoon. This is at Ripen Transition to Adulthood Week. We're really excited. So at Ripen, for those of you who don't know, every year for 11 years, we have done a conference on transition to adulthood. Super successful. It's a big conference. We're at a hotel. Lots of people come, pack into rooms, hear great seminars. Unfortunately, right now, we can't do that. So we decided to take our transition to adulthood conference, and rather than make you sit through one long day of Zoom, we're breaking it up and we're doing a whole week of different on-demand and live webinars, informational videos, lots of resources that we're sharing with you. So we're glad that you're joining us and that you're going to be a part of it today. Today, we're going to be talking about self-determination and person-centered planning. And with me today are a few of my Ripen colleagues. I have Sue Donovan is here.
Hi.
Crystal Cerullo is with us. And Sharon Koshin. They are all part of our transition to adulthood team, peer professionals from Ripen, meaning they have their own personal lived experience helping a loved one navigate some of these complicated life milestones and transitions. And we are all lucky to be joined today by Ken Renaud. Ken Renaud has over 40 years of experience in human services, extensive experience with curriculum development and training for professionals, families, and people with disabilities. Ken is a proud sibling of an older brother with disabilities who he helped raise as a child. He is passionate about capacity building and helping individuals create valued roles in their communities. Since 2008, Ken has been adjunct faculty for Community College of Rhode Island, teaching building healthy relationships and sexuality education for people with disabilities to over 140 college students. In 2010, Ken assisted with the founding of Rhode Island's first Rainbow Support Group for people with disabilities who identify as LGBTQ. He has co-facilitated and convened the Rhode Island Sexuality Educators Network. And Ken currently works as a consultant to the Rhode Island Department of Education, the ARC of Rhode Island Developmental Disabilities Council, and is a vendor for the state of Massachusetts as a sexuality educator for individuals with disabilities. We're very fortunate to be joined by Ken today. Ken, welcome.
Thank you all. It's so great to be here, and I'm pleased how many people are joining in our call. One of the things that I understand about self-determination and person-centered planning is how do we engage families and how do we engage individuals with disabilities in the process? So to that end, I'd like everybody to use your chat box for a second. And in the chat box, I'd like you to enter into some person-centered thinking. So think about your son, your daughter, your brother, your sister. If you're a professional joining us, maybe somebody you work with, or maybe for yourself. And the question I'd like you to answer is, what is the biggest wish that you have for that individual? And just take a moment to think about it and enter your responses in the chat box so Mark can monitor it for us. We'll take a few minutes to do this.
Okay, so lots of responses coming in that they can live with supported independence in a safe, caring, and respectful environment. We have my wish for my son is a happy and productive life. A lot of this, a happy life, independence, always having a voice in his decisions, to be able to navigate the world he lives in, that she can be independent with confidence, live a full life. Lots of these messages coming in. Function independently in the community, achieve his desired plan for independent living. Advocating for themselves is another one we have. Being happy, a lot of this coming up again, a lot of this happiness. So some great responses. Thank you all for those.
Great. So I appreciate everybody entering your responses to that question. So I always like to start with that question with individuals that I'm talking to about person-centered planning and self-determination. So because all person-centered planning processes, and there are many of them, and today we're not going to be getting into the processes themselves. We're just going to be talking about how to engage your family members and yourself and the trusted people in their lives into futures planning. So this is a first step that we do. So congratulations for everybody, because you've just entered into the world of person-centered planning. So give yourselves a round of applause, because you all deserve it. And, sometimes when I've done this exercise, I'm surprised by people's responses. And, a lot of times we talk about a life well lived and a good quality of life. But, sometimes when I've asked people literally break down. Family members break down and think about, oh my gosh, like I haven't really thought of the future for my son or daughter in that way. And that's the beauty of person-centered planning. When person-centered planning is done with integrity in the way that they were designed, there are amazing outcomes that happen for people. I wish I could spend 3-4 hours with you telling different stories about people I've helped over the years and what they've accomplished. So what I'll do is I'll share a couple of stories along the way when we have our conversation today. And if you do have questions, I invite you to enter them into the chat box. If you're like me, sometimes they enter my head and I want to get that out before I forget them. So this is very engaging, and please enter into a conversation with us. So Mark, if we could go to the first slide, please. While Mark is pulling that up, I'll start talking about the first slide, because there's a lot of different information I want to share with everybody. So if you're like me and you come into these webinars, you want to know, what am I in for? So what you're in for today is we'll be talking about, and it's the next slide, Mark, please. Yep, that's fine. So what we're going to be talking about today is 3 different components. I'm a big rule of 3 person. So I like to think of 3 content areas in presentations. So today we'll talk about person-centered thinking. We'll talk about person-centered planning, and we'll talk about person-centered doing. So the first slide that I'm showing you is to start dipping our toe in the water of person-centered thinking. And what you see in front of you is what's called the 5 valued experiences. So if you will, this is what people who are engaged in person-centered planning use as the core foundation for the work that they're doing with individuals. So I don't care what kind of planning process you're doing, these core valued experiences are part of those processes. So we have belonging, choosing, contributing, and sharing ordinary places, and being respected. So to give you a little bit of framing about that, let me tell you about a young man that I've worked with who I started working with him actually in middle school. I've worked with him in high school as well. And I'm going to be working with him as he enters into adult services. So leaving school service behind and entering the adult service world, which, if you don't already know, I hate to present it to you, but it's a whole other world and a whole other set of communication. And the fine folks at Ripen and others will help guide you through that transition process, because it is a journey. So this young man, when I first met him, he was in middle school, and I did a person-centered planning process, and we talked about what does he think his gifts are. And when I say gifts, I mean, as an individual, what are the things that you do well? What are the things that you think are your passions? The things that make you get up out of bed in the morning and say, I want to go do that. And for him, he talked about gardening was one of them. He also talked about food and preparing food, and he talked about singing. So this was a man that had some, I really, I can't get into details, but he had some severe challenges in the school department that was providing services to him. And it was so devastating and traumatic to this young man that we were looking for a way to get him out of the school into his community, to link his gifts with his passions in what's available in his community. So we're talking about his gift of farming. He happens to live on a farm with his dad, and they grow pumpkins and they grow garlic and they sell compost, and it's a good thing. He's learning a business along the way while he's engaged in the things he loves. And I said to him, I said, I absolutely understand farming is something you're really interested in. What would you like to do with that? What do you dream about in your future doing with gardening? And he said, you know what, Ken? I want to grow food for the homeless and people that are poor. I mean, this kid is in middle school. And, that's what I love about person-centered planning, the process and the way that we go about talking about and talking to an individual, with them directing us about what they want to do. It gets to a whole other level of thinking and sharing that we don't typically get to with, in my opinion, assessments and evaluations, and those, they have their place, but when you're really engaging somebody in this work and really helping guide the process, it makes a world of difference. So we talked about some other things that were in his community, and one of them was an actual working farm that was a job placement for people with disabilities with job coaches on site. And he eventually started working at that farm a couple days a week. So not only was he learning new farming skills and agricultural skills, he was literally getting paid for it. So if we look at the 5 valued experiences, this young man chose what he wanted. He's contributing in a big way. He brought his knowledge to that farm and taught some of the job coaches and staff as well. Sharing Ordinary Places, it is in the community. They have a farm stand and they have a store as well, and he gets to partake in all those areas. Being respected, of course, he's a very respected member of that community and the local community as well. And this is one of my favorites, belonging, that sense of belonging. We know that we got it right when the individual feels like they're contributing and they're belonging in meaningful ways, not just showing up and they're there. They're there and they're a contributing member. And one of the things that tells me that they belong and that they are really in that place that's so special of having a purpose is when other people say, hey, where's Ken today? We didn't see him today. So people are missing you and asking about you. That's huge to me. So with his talking about his cooking. This very farm ended up opening a cafe, and he started to learn some recipes, and now he's a prep cook for this cafe as well. And as far as singing, he has an interest in singing, in theater. He joined. He's part of a student body of Berkshire Hills Music Academy in Hadley, Mass. And that's a huge thing for him. So he's getting to practice and hone his skills in music, acting, and stage. So we literally took everything outside of the school walls, and he's been outside of the school walls in these different placements for the entirety, pretty much the entirety of his high school career. And now we're talking about transitioning into adult services. And I'll get back to his story in a few minutes. So Mark, if we could move on to slide number 4. I'd like to get to the definition of what person-centered planning means to me. So person-centered planning is the practice of defining a meaningful life that centers around the individual's hopes, dreams, and capacities. The person-centered planning values the input of the person first. Trusted people in that person's life are invited to contribute to the overall accomplishment of a desired quality of life. I'm not sure if you can actually see it, but in the photo on the slide, somebody's holding a stone up, and in this stone is etched the word believe. I can't tell you how huge that is. As family members coming into this process, and I've been there, so I know what it feels like to be in the room with your loved one, and you're talking about, this is personal stuff, and it can get really, I call it sometimes the good, the bad, the ugly, because sometimes people haven't had really good, meaningful experiences in their lives yet. So when we start opening this up to what's positive and possible, it can be a gush of emotions that's running over us. And those emotions are good. This is part of the journey that we go through. And ultimately, we're trying to get to the place of, this is an amazing person that's individual. There's no one else like this individual. Every single person has gifts, talents, and capacities that we can tap into. It's how do we get there? How do we find those particular, the things that click? And when I do person-centered planning, I like to talk about the aha moments. So even as a facilitator, I know in the questions I'm asking and the framing of the process that when I've asked a question and the individual answers it, or they're trusted people in the room, and people look at each other and sometimes say out loud, wow, why did we never think of that? Well, it's not that you didn't think of it, it's the process that we're using that elicits these responses and brings forth that positive energy of, yes, we can do this. And wow, isn't that interesting that we have this path to a really bright future now for our loved one. It's really, truly a life-changing experience. One of the things that I like to tell people is, if you're in a person-centered planning process, when I train people to do person-centered planning, and the way I was taught person-centered planning by the people who wrote these tools, you try it on for yourself first. Because as a facilitator, you have to know what it feels like to be that focus person, that people's asking you these questions. And how does it feel for you being that person that's people are asking questions, People are asking you questions, they're being graphically recorded on big, long rolls of white paper on a wall, and it's very colorful and intentional that we use graphics to describe what people are talking about, as well as questions. So we're using both sides of our brains for our planning. We're using the creative side with the visuals and the colors and the pictures, and we're using the intellectual side of our brain as well for the thinking part of it. So really important. Sometimes I've heard people say, I don't understand why people graphically record a person-centered planning process. And I'm going to tell you, as a facilitator who's done these processes for, you can ask Sue Donovan, well over 30 years, that we're not doing it for you. I hate to tell you that. We're doing it for the individual. We're doing it for the focus person, because they get to see a very different planning process. Instead of a whole bunch of people coming into a conference room with stacks of papers in front of them that they don't know what's on the papers. My brother always says, I went to an ISP meeting of his once, and all these people pile in the room. And I said, Ricky, who are all these people? And he said, I don't know who the hell they are. Why don't you ask them? So what's wrong with that process, right? This is his meeting and his planning, and he doesn't even know who these people are. That ain't right, as I like to say. That's not right. So we want to know who's coming in the room. We want the person to know, and the person sitting there, when they say something and they see the graphic recorder drawing a picture right after they've said something, they know that person's listening to them very intentionally and meaningfully. And I've done these planning processes with people that are very, very medically fragile, that have some cognitive abilities, maybe don't speak typical language, have their own language, to people that are ready to exit out of high school, rock it out in college, or start their own business. And every single person has been involved in the process in a very meaningful way. And we as facilitators are trained how to be able to get to that person, help them have their voice come into the room, just like we started today with you. Even though we're in a virtual room, your voice entered into a chat box about dreams, and that's what it's all about. If we could go to slide 8, I think. This is great. Thank you, Mark. You're ahead of me, and you're right where I need to be. So we talked about person-centered thinking. We're going to get more into person-centered thinking, planning, and doing when we open up for questions. But this is the third component, person-centered doing. So I have this really dear friend of mine. Her name is Deanne. Maybe some people on this call know her. I see some shaking of heads from people at Ripon. They absolutely know Deanne. She's a wonderful, wonderful person. She's not only a colleague, she's a dear friend of mine. And she came to me years and years ago and asked me, Ken, would you help do a person-centered planning process for me? So as a facilitator, I talk to other people that I know about the sweaty palms. And what I mean by that is I get a call from somebody and they say, Ken, can you do this? And of course, yes, I will. And I'm going to jump into it, but my palms start sweating already because I want to do such a good job. And for Deanne, I wanted to do the best job possible for her. So with Deanne, we have a person-centered planning process. She invites in all the trusted people in her life into this process. And I think now would be a good time to mention, I keep saying trusted people. when you're doing a person-centered planning, it's very different than an IEP process, or in the adult world, an ISP process, or individual service planning process. It's not prescriptive of there's an attendance list of all these different disciplines, professionals need to be in the meeting. Person-centered planning, the individual chooses who comes into the room that I trust to be part of my life and my futures planning conversations. Hugely important. I've been asked by the state of Rhode Island to conduct person-centered planning processes for individuals that had some significant challenges along the way. My answer is always yes. However, the person's going to decide who comes in the room. And if they don't choose their social caseworker, the social caseworker doesn't come into the room. Are we good with that? Yes. If we're good with that, then I'll move forward. But if they're demanding they have to be in the room, we got a problem with that. Because this is directed by the person they identified to us who's trusted. We can always get to the other people that need to be brought into the process after the fact, but very important to have only trusted people in the room. So we're doing this, big dream thinking with Deanne, and she had so many wonderful dreams that really changed her life. And one of them is we just started talking about a professional career, which she already had, but she wanted to start her own business. And I remember my business partner and my co-facilitator at the time, Diane Westerman, was doing the graphic recording. And I was trying to get from Deanne an image. Well, what she mentioned that she wanted to be that go-between, that bridge between people with disabilities, their families, and resources, and the provider system. And I was trying to flush it out with her. And I said, Deanne, tell me an image that comes to your mind. What does it look like? And Deanne describes to me, I use a wheelchair, Ken, and I literally think of myself in my wheelchair as being part of the framing and the suspension of the bridge. And my partner, Diane, came up with this beautiful image, graphic representation of Deanne in her wheelchair being actually part of this bridge that helps people guide them smoothly from one point to the next point of where they want to be. And this became Deanne's logo for her business. Deanne knows I share this story, of course. She's given me full permission. But that is the beauty of it. And when we get into other, like if I go back to my student and all the wonderful things that he's doing, it's a great story and I love it. And he's like just rocking it out in so many areas. It doesn't mean that it's a picture perfect life, right? He has his personal challenges, and his personal challenges are relationships with other people. So, but if we're putting people in environments that they choose, they want, and they're passionate about, our chances and their chances of success are tenfold of what they would be in, other than being in places that they do not want to be in. So I feel like I've done a fair amount of talking. Mark, we can collapse the slide now and the share. And I'd like to see, Mark, if we can open this up to questions that people might have.
Absolutely. Let's take a look. And folks, if you're with us, whether you're here on Zoom or watching the live stream via YouTube or on our Facebook page, you can send in your questions, type them into the comments on YouTube or on Facebook, right into the chat, or click the Q&A button here on Zoom, and I'm sure Ken and our team will do their best to answer them. One question here that I'm seeing is, what if individuals are possibly unrealistic or not possible due to cognitive deficits that the individual doesn't have insight about, maybe refuses to find work, housing, etc. Maybe that's not part of their own plan.
I love that question, and that question gets asked a lot. And I'll tell you that when we do these planning processes, most of them start with, just like we did today, that you all participated in. What is the dream? What is the dream for the individual? And doing one of these processes with this young man with Down syndrome in high school many years back, he said, we were talking about dreams, and he said, you know what, Ken? I want to be an airline pilot. And mom and dad are in the room, and they're ready to, like, and I'm like, time out. Let's stop that. This is his dream. And the beauty of these processes, we want people to dream really, really big. I always say dream big with a capital D, not the small d, because the bigger the dream is, without editing it, the closer we're going to get to what that person really wants. So we start with that dream as big as possible. We get into what is positive and possible, and that's where we fine tune it. We try to get as close to the dream. We want to literally touch the dream for people. And for this young man, he wasn't going to be an airplane pilot. He didn't have the cognitive ability for that. But what we did do is say, well, who do people know? And somebody in the room's like, hey, I got a cousin Vinny who works at TSA over at TF Green Airport. I can get the kid in there and he can have, not just a nickel tour, a $5 tour of the airport, which we did do. So he gets the $5 tour, and they're taking him, in the back to see TSA. He sees them whooping around luggage and stuff. And this guy's like one of those big dudes that's like, the power lifter in Special Olympics. He thought he died and went to heaven when he saw that. And so long story short, eventually they get him into, just a couple hours a day volunteering, and then moves into a small, 6-hour pocket of hours that he's paid to work in that department. He's not an airplane pilot, right? But he's working in an airport. He gets to see these pilots day in and day out. And that's the beauty of this. And we keep building and moving that dream closer and closer.
Very cool. Very cool story. I love that. Another question now, a little bit more of a maybe nuts and bolts kind of question. Where and when would this take place? Meaning, how early can you do person-centered care? And does this change? Can this change?
Yes, absolutely. So I always like to think we can start with person-centered planning work when they're in middle school, and we can just start that process. And they're very different processes that we use at milestones in people's lives. So middle school, we can absolutely do one, and there's many we can think about. We've done, and Sue, we were involved in a person-centered planning process with your daughter and some of the other fine folks at Ripen. And it was a group person-centered planning process, which what was cool about that was every family got to hear what the other family's hopes and dreams were. And it really was an amazing experience for those students. But I always like to say, we do one in middle school, we do one a couple of years or at least a year before transitioning to adult services, a different person-centered planning tool, so that's a very much different focus. So they're walking from school to adult services with a really clear map of what they want in their lives and how they want to get there and who's going to be involved in that.
Great, that's great. And you're talking about this process as early as middle school. And we have another question that I'm seeing on our Facebook page. Somebody asking, how and when does a parent bring this into the IEP process? How is this process implemented? So, how does it interact with those IEP meetings that you're already having at that point?
Great. Thank you for that question. I love that. To me, person-centered planning is the starting point, and that what we learn from the person-centered planning should inform all the required documents and forms and different things that people do. So being more clear with that is we do our person-centered planning process that can and should inform the IEP. It should inform the career development plan, which all students need as well. And to me, it's when you're able to get those done, that's the time to do them. Sometimes people say, how often do you do them? There is no prescriptive how often. It's when the individual or the families or the schools feel like there's a need for one, and we can go and do those processes as needed. But again, it gives you that, it gives everybody, to me as a professional, doing the person-centered planning process, when it comes time for me to fill out the required forms, it's a piece of cake because I know everything the person wants now. It's not, I'm having to guess and fudge and fill stuff in just to, to fill out the form. A form is a form is a form. Forms will always change. These processes are very different. They're, if we go back to those 5 valued experiences, those are always going to be part of this planning.
Excellent. Very good. So kind of a little bit of an opposite side of that last question, we have a question. How can young adults after high school engage in resources for person-centered planning and adult services, even if they were never diagnosed or served in K through 12? So there's never been an IEP that's never been even identified during that person's public school career. How
Yep.
can that person access this?
Well, another great question. And I'll frame it this way. Person-centered planning processes were first created and designed to help students with disabilities that were underserved in schools. So they rolled one process out and it worked great. And then years later, they rolled another one out for adults. So the authors of these tools have, say, for the kids in school, their capture is just sit there and tell us your story. For the adults in the process they use, it's don't just sit there, do something. So 2 very different focuses and processes. And these processes can be used for individuals with disabilities. I've conducted these for adults, very, high power position people in our society that everybody would know if I mentioned their names, but I won't, out of privacy and respect, to organizations. Like I did a person-centered planning process for Miriam Hospital HIV Prevention and Trials Unit. We did a process 1 year, and then 2 years later, they called me and said, Ken, can you come back and do this? We're really excited and we want you to come in, and we're rocking and rolling. And I come back in and I say, well, bring the old process so we can look and see what you've done, and we'll set up a time to conduct the new one. And I'm in somebody's office and they're hedging. And I'm like, I wonder what they're hedging. We're sitting there for like 15 minutes. And then finally, somebody comes running in sweating and with the person-centered plan rolled up in their hand. I found it. We had done it years ago. It had been rolled up and put in a closet. When we rolled it back out, they were pointing, look at that we talked about. Look at this one, look at that one, look at that one. They had surpassed everything that they had talked about. But that's the beauty of this, that it sits differently in our brains than a form. It's not a checklist. It's not something that is prescribed and we're doing and we mark it off as done or whatever. It just sits differently in everybody's brains. And the authors of these tools actually used a person-centered planning process for an entire country of Scotland. So it could be for one person to a whole country. They're for everybody, and they're very beneficial. One of the things that I will mention is that through my consulting work with the ARC of Rhode Island, we're going to be starting what's called a community of practice for person-centered planning. So Sue, you might remember, Crystal, you maybe remember as well, that many years ago, there was where I worked, we had this community of practice called the Rhode Island Facilitator Forum. So we're starting that up again. We have some seed money for that. And we're going to be inviting people in to come along on the journey with us, where we're going to create a safe space for learning these processes. And my passion is, as a family member, I want to be able to teach family members how to do these processes so that you guys can support each other in this, thinking and planning, so that you can help each other's kids and family members be, have these amazing outcomes. That's one of my career goals, is to help families learn and be able to facilitate. We can all become a resource to each other when we learn these processes and be able to provide them for people that need them, for people that fall through the cracks, that haven't been deemed eligible for services for whatever reason. They're for everybody.
That's great. This is really, I think, really important for folks to hear that, you might have a preconceived idea about who this applies to, and you're just blowing it wide open for folks, Ken. I think this is great. We've got some members of our Ripen team are also with us, of course, today.
Mm-hmm.
And Sue, Sharon, Crystal, feel free to chime in at any point. We've got a couple more questions, and still time to take your questions, folks. If you're listening in on Zoom, watching us on YouTube, on Facebook, feel free to submit those questions in the comments. Here's one. After the planning, so you do the person-centered planning, who is responsible for making these dreams into reality?
Well, I want to start with the person first. It is person-centered planning. So this is all about them. So, I know for a fact when I do these processes that the individuals that are the focus people, that they run out of the room, some of them, and they're so happy. One of the best examples I can give you is I did a person-centered planning process with this young man. And he was somebody that we talked about the same thing. What are your gifts? What are your talents? And he talked for over an hour. And we filled 3 flip charts with graphic recording of all these things. And then he said, then I had my motorcycle accident and I have an acquired brain injury. And he was only able to give us one thing after the accident. And people were struggling with him because they knew he had this great capacity. So we looked at, this is all of him, not just this one thing after the accident. And as he's spouting all these things that he was good at and that he's been involved in, he said, I used to read to the kids in libraries. Well, the staff that were with him looked at each other and they said, why didn't you ever tell us about this stuff? And these are really good staff and it's a great agency. It wasn't that, it was the process that brought it out at him. And he just looked around at him. He said, well, you never asked me, So I leave the planning process at his apartment. I go back to my office. The secretary says, Ken, this guy, I'm not going to say his name, has been blowing up our phones, calling for you. I said, okay, well, I'll give him a call back. I called him back. He said, I got so excited about our planning process that I called every single library in the whole state of Rhode Island till I got to a yes that I could go in and read to kids. Now that's an accomplishment. Work well done for everybody, right? Particularly the person. But we also, in our processes, we're always thinking about expanding the social capacity of that individual. So who are the people that can help them get done what they're trying to accomplish? And sometimes it's people, sometimes it's organizations, or sometimes it's community places. And obviously, not everybody's going to be in the room, but we can start assigning people, linking them to what the individual is identifying and how they want to get that done. We use our collective wisdom of people that come in the room of, oh, yeah, I know this group, or I know this person. That might be a good link to help them accomplish what they're trying to accomplish in their life.
Excellent. That's wonderful. So another question, questioner writes that their question is a little more of a generic question. They say they're starting from square one again, and I'm currently on the mailing list for Ripen, but could really use help in getting services from my son. Who can I reach out to for assistance?
So I'll put that over to the Ripen staff.
So hi. So my name is Sue Donovan, and it sounds like you're on our mailing list, which is terrific. Not knowing the details, the age of your son or where he's attending, I would recommend that you call our call center and they will connect you with, after a brief intake, they'll connect you with the right person, to give you some side-by-side navigating, whether it's, to discuss your IEP or what your son's IEP looks like, or what really what his needs are. And you can go from there. We're also connected to many other agencies. Like Ken mentioned, Ken is very involved with RIFORCE and the ARC, and the Department of Education. And we work in tandem with these agencies as well, along with the Rhode Island Developmental Disabilities Council, Advocates in Action, and the Sherlock Center. So we have a reach. So if there's something that Ripen can't help you with, we can connect you with the right folks at Sherlock or the right folks at the DD Council or Ken or the ARC, so that you are getting the appropriate support that you need depending on where you're at. Just to piggyback a little bit on Ken's person-centered planning, that was introduced to me and to my family, I want to say when my daughter was probably maybe 5th grade. And she participated in an individualized one when she was older. And she also, as Ken said, participated in a group person-centered planning, which was a wonderful experience. And there were 2 things as a parent that I realized were so important. One, not to be afraid to ask and invite folks in the room that know and love my child. It was important for other people to be there, because when it comes to my children, it's hard for me to be objective. So, the first thing was to make sure that, and people were so receptive. They were thrilled to be invited and asked, and they really have great insight. And then the second key thing was I sat in the back of the room. My husband and I went to the back of the room because we wanted to make sure that this was really driven by her and her plan writer and the people that know her, and that they were really being able to contribute. And we found that the facilitator, along with the folks that knew and loved her the most, besides mom and dad, were able to help with those reality checks. Like, oh, you want to be, a professional basketball player. So have you ever picked up a basketball before? No. Okay, might have a little bit, there may be a learning curve here. So it was easier for other folks to help her build, well, if I want this, what are the steps that I need to take in between to make that happen? And maybe it's not, maybe it's really not being a professional basketball player, but maybe I want to go to a game once a month and cheer on my friends, so what does that look like?
Yeah, again, touching the dream. If you're not going to get to the dream, how close can we get to it? Yeah, and that was a wonderful experience with everybody that came in the room. And like you've shared, Sue, that not only was it individually wonderful for each person that participated, they ended up creating some lasting friendships and relationships along the way with the other folks that were in the room. And one of the things that I will say is that in the state of Rhode Island, we have what's called the consent decree. So the Department of Justice came in and said that Rhode Island was not in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And we entered into some work to expand employment outcomes and career exploration for students and adults. And as part of the consent decree, it states in there that students with disabilities are entitled to person-centered planning processes. So sometimes, depending on what district you're in, they might be more familiar with person-centered planning than others. But what you can do is, now that you have my email, you can shoot me an email if this is something that's interesting to you. Like I mentioned at the beginning, and Mark was saying from my bio, I do some consulting work with Rhode Island Department of Education through West Bay Collaborative with Teresa Curran. And it's all about getting these students a really good person-centered planning process so that they're able to move forward. And it's fine that some people might not know who the heck Ken Renault is. That's fine. But the important thing is, that you have a resource to be able to get some of that important planning and conversation done with folks.
So funny that you should mention Teresa Curran, because she's actually going to be on with us tomorrow afternoon at 3:00.
Yes, I saw that.
And Teresa is, regional transition coordinator. She directs special education services out of the West Bay Educational Collaborative, and we have educational collaboratives around the state. And Crystal and Sharon and Ann at Ripon work with the regional transition centers, and those folks that are working with high school and middle school teams and teachers in the school districts. So Teresa and her colleagues are also trained facilitators around person-centered planning. So I know, Sharon, I think last year, or well, maybe it was a couple of years ago, you worked with your school district and your regional transition center to do transition planning for your son. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. Thank you, Sue. We had been invited to a person-centered plan. At that point, I didn't know what to expect. My son was 14, and why were we thinking about what his life was going to look like after college? Because he was only in 6th grade. But it was time to start thinking outside the box, and I had a really good teacher that kind of led me, gave me some information around the reason why it was important. And she had me not only bring myself and my husband, but also anybody else, like you have said, Sue, that would be caring and knows a lot about my son, but can be a little more objective, because as parents, we do put the rose-colored glasses on sometimes, or we say, he can't do that. There's no way he can do that. And what happened was, he has a direct service worker that works with our home through a past program. And she came and she said, Mom, he absolutely can do that. Have you seen him do XYZ in the community? Because I've seen it with him, and the tears just started falling from my eyes, because it was like just imagining there was some hope, and there was also that there was a bigger picture that I needed to start thinking about. So, thank you.
Yeah, that's really the beauty of person-centered planning. It opens up all our thinking. You know, I tell everybody I've been doing this work for over 30 years. Every single time I do a person-centered planning process, I learn something new. And that's what I love so much about it, that we are all in this together. The person is central to what we're doing, bringing their voice in the room. And I have what I call bag and baggage when I do these. Sue's seen it, you know, Crystal, Sharon. I come in with props and, you know, stress balls and yes and no buttons and funky colored glasses and everything, so that we want to engage the person. And that's my job as a facilitator, to engage the person, make sure they know this is about them, this is about their life, and they're going to have a great life. We're going to make the best life possible for them, and that's what it's all about.
And as you're hearing the personal stories of our Ripen team on here talking about their experiences with their own children going through some of these processes, that's not a coincidence. This is the peer support model that Ripen is built on. If you call Ripen for support with these issues, you're going to be working with someone who has not only do they have firsthand lived experience, but they've gone on to help other adults, other parents go through all of these same processes themselves. So you're really getting that enhanced level of support from Ripen. I think we have time for one more question that I saw come in, and that is, how do you plan a career for nonverbal people?
Again, I would start with the individual. We're always start with that person and what are they interested in. And I had, I'll make this story short. I worked with this individual who was transitioning from high school to adult services. I met her mother at a training I was doing, and she said, my daughter's transitioning in 3 months. I asked her teacher, when are we going to start the transition process? And she said, oh, we've got plenty of time. Well, we know that's wrong, that the process should have started before. So we did a person-centered planning process with her daughter, who is nonverbal, medically fragile, had spasticity in one arm. So she was transported around a lot in either a hospital bed or a wheelchair. And when we were talking about her gifts, the teacher that was in the room for the planning said, I've been teaching her how to use her other hand and develop muscle tone and strength and coordination. So I was like, that's the gift. This is the gift that she has. What are some of her interests? She said she loves to go to the Mystic Aquarium. They live down in that part of Rhode Island. So we said, great, let's get her to be a member of that community. She needs a membership, number one, become a visible person that goes to not only the aquarium, their events, their fundraisers, all that cool stuff. And long story short, when she went there, she would touch the aquariums and she would react and laugh at all the fish swimming away. So with that one gift, she starts volunteering, feeding the fishes. That's what she's doing. And of course, she keeps coming to the events. Everybody knows her name. And she ends up getting a small pocket of hours paid for a job feeding fishes eventually in a place that she loves. So, you know, just a small, you know, window into what's possible. And it really, I go back to the person. What is their interest? What do they dream about? And that's our job as facilitators to bring that forth. And that person's trusted community of folks and the individual themselves to make it happen, to become a reality.
Can I just add something really quick on top of that, Ken?
Yeah.
I worked with a family that their son had significant challenges and he loved being around firefighters. That was his family.
Yeah.
He came from a family of firefighters. And even though he had the disability, he still was amped up on being a firefighter. Through the person-centered planning process, what it came down to is that he really wanted to wear a uniform. That was what he identified with. So they got him some fireman gear, and he volunteered at the firehouse. He would help the guys prepare meals. He would do some odd like cleaning around the place. He got to wash down the fire trucks. So he absolutely reached his dream by being around the firemen without actually ever, knowing that he couldn't be a fireman, but he got what he could out of the dream. And like you said, that touching that dream, I just thought that was really important, that it wasn't about being a firefighter. It was about wearing the uniform. And that's what I identified with.
Yep, absolutely.
Crystal, I know you do a lot of, you do work with individuals around individual support plans when they enter into the adult services system. Are you seeing a lot of person-centered planning in conjunction with that, over the past year or two?
Yes, I think it's still a learning curve. I think families are kind of adjusting to that, it's the whole process should be more person-centered, even doing the ISP, and that it's not just kind of like wording it a certain way just so that it can get approved again, or just making sure we have certain goals in there, really thinking about what the individual wants to do, even outside of that BHDDH adult funding, like just what do they want to do, and even past the next year, and kind of touching upon all of that. So I think the whole process is changing and people are adjusting to that. And I think the individuals themselves are kind of more happy to see that it's a more individualized process in general.
Excellent. Well, I think we've just about run out of time, and I want to thank my Ripon colleagues, Sue Donovan, Sharon Koshin, Crystal Cerullo. Thank you for sharing your insights and expertise and your personal stories. Especially want to thank Ken Renaud, our guest. Thank you, Ken, for all of that wonderful information, for sharing some great stories. Really inspiring stuff, I think, and I hope that our audience today was also inspired. And folks, this is the first day of Transition to Adulthood Week. We're going to be doing this every day from 3 to 4. Tomorrow we'll be back talking about independent living for individuals with disabilities. We hope you can join us and you can see the whole schedule and all of the resources we have available for Transition to Adulthood Week at our website, www.ripon.org. Thank you again for joining us today, and everybody enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. Dream big and believe in possibilities.